Shalom and welcome to Jewish Insights. Sometimes when we follow the news, and especially since October 7th when we follow the news, there's the story and then there's the story. There's the stories that are told to us and the stories that we see that sometimes, make us more anxious or stressed or make us sad, but we don't always see actually what's happening, and it's really hard to know unless you're really there. Some of those stories might be that religious Jews don't serve in the army in Israel. That's one story we might hear that is actually not true at all. Another story we might hear would be talking about the emotional and mental challenges that are affecting everyone over in Israel. But a story we might not hear is what are the unique challenges for those who are halachically observant, who keep Jewish law? What are the legal questions that are arising for them as they go through this process? A variety. You might not think of that. It's not about whether this food is kosher or not. It's much more complicated. Another area that's overlooked is the challenges faced by the leaders of these communities. How do you navigate families coming to you with questions, families grieving, choices that are being made literally every minute and every hour? Another story that's not necessarily being focused on is what is religious Zionism and what might it look like after this war is over? Again, we lean into some extreme versions that we might see posted on social media, but we're not having a nuanced conversation. And so my guest today is immersed in all of these issues I just mentioned, as well as many, many more, and we're very excited to welcome back to JBS. Rabbi Dr. Kenneth Brander is President and Rosh HaYeshiva of the Ohr Torah Stone Network, which is 32 educational institutions, leadership development initiatives, outreach endeavors, women's empowerment programs, and social action projects, with thousands of alumni who have served in the IDF in Israel. That's overwhelming to even hear. There's so much there, and we'll scratch the surface of all the people that he is touching in his work. He has previously served in several senior leadership roles at Yeshiva University, and before that, he spent 14 years serving as the senior rabbi of the Boca Raton Synagogue, overseeing an explosion in growth, both in terms of number of families and development of schools for the first time in that area that continues to this day. And I just came back from Boca Raton because my in-laws live there during the winter, and it is very special, the Jewish community there. The last thing I'll say before we begin is I don't know how I didn't know this, but I put two and two together in a conversation with the Pavas recently, where I realized that Tuvia is your son, and Tuvia is my friend from the Wexner Graduate Fellowship, so I'm grateful for my relationship with him. And now that we're chatting for the first time, I see the resemblance and the voice and the commitment to serving the Jewish people, and so it's all coming together. So should I call you Rabbi or Dr. Brander? What do you prefer?
You can call me Kenny Brander.
Fine.
Whatever you want.
All right. Well, thank you for that permission, Kenny. Welcome. It's an honor to have you here. I know you're in from Israel on a brief trip, and we're thrilled that you're spending some time in the studio with us today.
Thank you for having me. It's a pleasure to be here again. I enjoyed my time with Mark of blessed memory, and I just wish you much success on building on the shoulders and continuing to grow JBS, which is listened to all over the world.
Maine, thank you so much. And I will say, I think the last time you were on JBS was 2018 with Rabbi Mark Golub, and you were just getting started. I think you were literally about to make Aliyah to take over your role at Ohr Torah Stone. It's, 7 years later, something like that, 6.5, 7 years later. Catch me up. What's happened to this? I know we've had COVID and a war, but how's it been? Yeah,
that's a short story. We've had 2 years of COVID and 2 years of a war, so it doesn't seem like 8 years. It seems like 20 years.
Oh
but it's been an amazing experience with a lot of challenges. First of all, our institutions are really growing. We've expanded our institutions and our reach. Ohr Torah Stone is an unapologetic, modern Orthodox institution which wants to deal with the most challenging issues through the lens of modern Orthodoxy, through the lens of halacha. And a basic of that is to educate young people. We have 5,000 students, both in the high school and the post-high school level. Another thing is to deal with the most challenging of questions, be it the fact that for the first time in 2,000 years, we are not minorities in the country, but we're the sovereigns. How do you deal as sovereigns with minority populations through the prism of halacha, of decency and of respect? And of course, we deal with some of the social challenges, whether it's the idea of abused women, agunot, whether it's ideas of how to promote teaching leadership by both men and women for the Jewish community, both in Israel and through emissaries throughout the world.
Beautiful. Let me just start with the first thing you mentioned there around being the religious majority instead of minority, right? This has not happened in millennia in our history, right? We're used to being the minority. We have full tractates of our Talmud, like Avodah Zarah, focused on what does it mean to be a minority religion in a majority culture. And you're raising this question of what does it mean to be the majority religion and how to think about minority religions in our culture. Speak about that.
I think that is an amazing question, and there are different tracks through which you have to think about that opportunity. I wouldn't call it a challenge, but that opportunity. I would start off with saying that in the Tractate of Yoma, in the Babylonian Talmud, it separates commandments into two paradigms. Commandments between ourselves and God, and commandments between ourselves and other people. I think in a Jerusalem version of that, in an Israel version, in a modern Zionist version, there are actually three paradigms of commandments. Responsibilities in our engagement with God, our personal romantic rendezvous with God, our engagement with other people, which is, by the way, you cannot have a relationship with God if you don't treat others with respect. And then I think there's a third paradigm of commandments, the responsibility that we have to the people, lumiyut, responsibility that we have to the nation in a land in which it is being governed by a Jewish majority. So that requires, for example, a whole bunch of things. In Israel, the public arena has to be a religious arena. That does not mean a coercive arena. That doesn't mean to shut down everything on Shabbat. But it's part of the conversation. How do you run a hospital? How do you run an army on Shabbat? You know, you'll walk into a base on Shabbat when there's not a war, and there's a grumma switch, a switch that opens the gates. It doesn't create a direct current, but an indirect electrical current for Shabbat when there are no challenges. I mean, that's only in a country in which you are running the country through the prism of Jewish ideals. But equally, and perhaps more important, is what is the ethics of our soldiering, of our warfare? How do we engage? And tragically, and indeed perhaps at the same time, I think it's a source of pride, although has tragic consequences, how we deal with civilians in warfare is really much guided by a Jewish experience. And I can tell you personally, as somebody who has lost 20 students in this war, which is just, and another 38 members of our family, in other words, of the Ohr Torah Stone family, that people have lost their lives simply because of their Jewish way they were in Gaza, whether it's feeding a child only for that child to be the bullseye for a sharpshooter who then not only wounded that child, but killed the soldiers that wished to feed the child, because there's a Jewish context.
Wait, sorry, explain what happened there? What was?
In that case, there was a situation in which a child came towards a tank. The people in the tank gave the children food only for the fact that those children had been sent there so that the soldiers could go out of the tank and then they could take aim at those soldiers.
God, oh my gosh! This was someone from the Ohr Torah Stone.
And not just only from the Ohr Torah Stone. It's something that happened in the first few days of the war, before we figured out all the different savagery that was going on. But my point, at least at this point, is the fact that when you are part of the state of Israel, the public thoroughfare, the army, and also the responsibilities that we have to minorities. We have been a minority for so long, but in the Bible, in the Torah, it tells us how to deal with minorities, to treat them with respect. More times than it tells us how to keep kosher or Shabbat.
Right.
And so we have to build the Torah of how to treat minorities with respect, despite all the challenges that we're dealing with, because losing 58 students and loved ones from our Ohr Torah Stone family is the reason, is the mandate why we have to live a life in which we can engage in the full expression of what it means to be part of the Jewish country and the Jewish state. So I think the first thing that I'm seeing about making Aliyah, being part of the Ohr Torah Stone vision, is the responsibility to be part of a society where we train students about their responsibilities to live a life of commitment to God, to others, and to the nation, that we deal with social issues like abuse that sometimes happens with marriages that have ended a long time ago, but the woman hasn't received her writ of divorce, as well as protocols on how to fight in a war and how to celebrate our Jewish experiences even in a war. And as the head of 32 institutions, that at the high point of the war we had 5,000 between faculty and students and alumni in the Army.
Wow.
Which was a pretty intense experience.
5,000.
Yeah, but we also, as a father who is now studying with his son, who's about to start in the Army, and one who's in the Army in reserves, where the opportunities are amazing, the challenges, we have to step up to the challenges, but the opportunities are amazing.
Wow. Okay, so you shared a lot there. I want to unpack some of it. I'm going to start with a smaller question that you glossed over, and I'll try to remember and make my way through some of the things that you shared. The first, when thinking about how religion pervades society there, you kind of said it's not going to be a country that shuts down on Shabbat. I wanted to, I have a memory as a child of the first time I came to Israel and expecting it to be that the whole country keeps Shabbat, that the whole country was kosher, and I remember being like, don't they read, and I don't think I was even keeping Shabbat at the time, but I was like, don't they read the Bible? The Bible says if you break these rules, God will kick you out of the land, and I can't believe this country is like this. In your opinion, I know this is not up for discussion in Israel, but I'm more trying to just understand, in your opinion, is the reason the country should not shut down on Shabbat, is that about the rights of minority groups? Is that about respecting secular Israelis who don't keep Shabbat? Is that about separating church and state? What do you think? Why shouldn't it be a Shomer Shabbat country?
Well, first of all, let's just the facts are that over 90% of the Jewish community in Israel has a Shabbos experience. It might be lighting the candles and then having a Shabbos meal together and then going to the mall.
Right.
It might be...
What do they call it?
Shabbos. I call it a Shabbos experience.
Or something?
I just call it a Shabbos experience.
Beautiful, okay.
Or whether it's going to services Shabbat morning and then going to the beach.
Right. The time is marked.
The time is marked, and there is a Jewish experience. Over 60% of Jews in Israel fast on Yom Kippur. So the country is a religious country, and I never use the word Chiloni because I haven't met a Chiloni. In other words, that doesn't mean that I haven't met people who don't observe Shabbat, but they are religious. I remember after our first grandson was born and was circumcised in Israel, and I was dressed like this, as I am every day. But the cab driver asked me why I was dressed like this, because it's not the standard dress. And I explained to him that I was just the sandik. I held the baby, my grandchild, at the brit. And this person who had multiple body piercings, only to be, the body piercings were only broken up by tattoos. And he's the driver of the car. He stops the car, turns off the meter, and asks for a bracha, a blessing. And only after I would give him a blessing would he take me to my destination with no additional charge. Now, I want to ask you a question. Is that person religious or not? In my opinion, he's religious. How many times have I been, because I was visiting students, both in the North and the South during the war, and someone would come over to me and say, I just came out of Gaza, and I was saved, and I want to make this bracha. I don't really know the words. Hagomel, can you say it with me? And they would take their hand and make it like a kippah, and they would make the bracha. So is that person religious? In my opinion, that person is very religious. So I haven't yet found a person who's totally secular.
Sure.
I think everybody finds their own pathway to God in Israel. It's so acutely out there, even with all the challenges, even with all the questionings of where is God. People are still finding their way towards God. So from my perspective, the reason why the country shouldn't shut down on Shabbat is because I think we're actually curtail people's search. I think that when we decide to be big brother instead of embracing everyone with respect, I think we hurt religion. God does not need us to be his policemen. God needs us to engage people. And I think that Torah is so special and so spiritual that let's allow it to do its own work and not feel that we need to protect it.
Beautiful. I love that. That's really beautiful. Wow. Okay. I want to move into, you mentioned a little bit, and it's a lot to hear. So 5,000 people serving, and within that, unfortunately, the passing of 20 alumni and 38 family members of alumni.
38 family members. It could be the teacher's son, or it could be the father of a student.
The Ohr Torah Stone family.
Yeah.
Just kind of talk me through, I don't know, you're the leader of this massive conglomerate of all these educational institutions. How are you coping with that? How are you helping them cope with that? What's that experience like from where you're sitting?
So when the war began, I think we were all searching to find something that we could do. You know, kids who never, touched a broom in their life were cleaning out bomb shelters. You know, when my son started doing that, I told him that when he touches the broom for the first time, he should make a shehecheyanu on it, because I didn't know he knew how to use it. But thank God he did amazing work
for
a new experience.
Yes, exactly.
Right, and they did.
This is the one who's about to go to the army?
This is the one,
okay, great.
yeah.
We'll get to him, great,
yeah.
Okay.
And they did heroic things, and he did heroic things, and hopefully when he hears this, he'll still talk to me.
Yeah.
But he did heroic things, and everyone did. And I was also searching, how do I service my colleagues, my friends, my students? So some of that was the responsibility to go visit them, which I did on a regular basis, both in the North and the South. In the beginning of the war, because it was 130% reservist return, the Army had prepared enough materials for what's called sadir, people who were in regular Army, but didn't have enough materials for the reservists. So many of us who are the rabbis, Rosh HaYeshivot, all of a sudden got into the business of collecting the materials that they would need, bulletproof vests, and everything else they would need in order to be safe. And a lot of religious questions came with that. And then I started...
Give me an example of one.
Sure. We collected 20 bulletproof vests. They're called ephodei ceramic vests. And there's a front plate and a back plate. They're exactly the same, those plates. And we collected 20 of them because we thought that's what they needed. And then we got a phone call a few hours later. It was a group in the North. They said, no, we don't need 20, we need 40. So they wanted to know if they could take the back plate out and give it to everybody, to another 20 people. So everyone only had the front plate, which protected you from enemy fire, but didn't protect you if, God forbid, there was friendly fire from the back. Could the people that we gave the vest to put themselves into quasi-danger, taking out the back plate to prevent anyone else who would be in greater danger? Could they do that? Now, you don't have the time to say, I'll get back to you in a week,
First look up the Shulchan Aruch, legal code on this.
Yeah, you don't have the time to do that. You need to give them an answer right now. First of all, by the time you give them an answer in an hour, they might be over the border, and really they shouldn't be They shouldn't have their phones. And even if they did, you don't want to call their phones. And so you have to answer those questions right away. Those are the heavier questions.
Right. And can I just ask on that? Who does make the call there? Is it like they ask you, or they ask their commander? Like, is it like, how does that work?
So the
I
commander.
I don't want to say commander. I don't know my legal terms for army.
We'll use
is it an
term.
army question, or is it a religious question?
No, I think the commander is asking that they get the material they need, and the commander will say, you know what? You're not everybody needs a bulletproof vest, and you'll be in positions that maybe you do need it or you don't need it. The commander has to do a risk assessment evaluation. The rabbi's risk assessment evaluation is different. The commander says, we only have 20 vests. Let's use the 20 vests just in this way and not in this way, because he's making based on the tools he has in front of him.
Right.
The rabbi is being asked, with the permission of the commander, if they can divide them up a little bit differently. And once the commander says, yeah, if you guys are, but the commander is not going to tell a soldier, take out your back ceramic plate and give it to somebody else. That the commander is not going to do. The commander might decide which 20 should have gotten it to begin with,
right.
Or the commander will send you the specs for which type of, ceramic vests they need. So you make a decision based on the knowledge that you have, and come to some conclusions.
Got it.
So those were I would consider.
Those are the calls you're getting
in the first few weeks of the war, when materials were sparse.
Okay, and then
started to realize when there were so many losses, so many young people. And you would
sorry, I don't mean to cut you off. Someone told me that 1% of those called up for reserves were people connected to Ohr Torah Stone. Is that true?
I think at some point it was, yes.
Wow.
Yeah.
So across Israel, 1 out of every 100 people that were...
Yeah, for a short period of time, but we're not... I mean,
how does that compare to the population of the country? What percentage of the population of the country are you? I assume much less than 1%.
Much less than 1%, but I think the religious Zionist community, although all communities fully participated with the exception of one, I never looked at it that way. I looked at we were all rowing in the same direction.
Right.
I never counted what our percentage of losses are versus somebody else's. I don't have sometimes people used our losses to advocate political points, which deeply disturbed us. There was one ad in a newspaper that listed the top 5 schools or 5 institutions that lost loved ones, and they all were religious Zionist institutions. And on the bottom it says, the religious Zionist community doing its share, signed by people who had political leanings and were trying to make points for themselves. I immediately, when I saw that, actually called the other institutions to see if they had given permission. None of them did. We jointly wrote a letter to the newspaper, not blaming them, but to say to them, we don't want our names. Our job is to honor the people, right, not to use them as pawns. And then I wrote a letter to the President of the State of Israel just to let him know. He has nothing to do with the politics of the government from that perspective, just to let him know that none of us sanctioned this ad so that the message would get out. So I don't look at it that way, but I realized, and I think we all are starting to realize this, that we needed to deal with the fact that we were all in trauma for these losses, right, and we needed to deal with the resilience and the mental health issues. So we created a whole infrastructure to Ohr Torah Stone, and I have to say it's, and particularly thanks to so many donors in North America who saw this issue and understood it way before Israelis did. And we created capacity for, first of all, to have private therapy sessions for students and for teachers, because teachers were going through hell. First of all, if you were an older teacher, you had your grandchildren in your house sleeping by you because their fathers were in war, and the mothers needed additional help. So all of a sudden you were making lunches that you hadn't made for 20 years. If you were a little bit younger, you sometimes had your husband, sometimes a son both serving, and then you would have to come to school and walk into a classroom with 30 people, 30 kids, who all are going through the same hurricanes, and lead with a smile. So we wanted to make sure there was resilience, and so we created therapy sessions. We created the wherewithal to have group therapy. We trained our teachers in areas of trauma, and when they saw one of their colleagues or one of their students, they could walk them over to, and they still can, to a place in which they could get therapy. And Ohr Torah Stone and its generous donors have covered that. And doing programs, I think, in particularly for the Kollel families, our postgraduate groups where the husband might be for 150 plus days, the wife is taking care of 3 kids or 4 kids under 8 years old. No one knows that her husband's in the army. She's wearing her regular clothing, but the truth is she's wearing the real uniform. But when she goes to renew her driver's license, and she has to look at her clock because there's corporal pickup, she doesn't go to the front of the line because she's not wearing the uniform. So we wanted to make sure that they were taken care of. And so that, to me, became the first order of business. Make sure that while we have many broken hearts, and the truth is that broken hearts can be taught at a higher level than any other heart, but you also have to be willing to heal the heart. And you have to be willing to create structures for that, what we call in Hebrew chosen, resilience. So we've created those structures, both through the latitude and the longitude of our Ohr Torah Stone community. And now others are learning from us, and the Ministry of Education is coming to visit what we've been doing. So we haven't been doing it alone, but we have really made that a responsibility.
Wow, so on that point, it's so important, and it makes so much sense to be investing heavily in mental health opportunities to take care of those who are suffering across the board here. Was this a space you were deeply in? It was about buffing it up, or was you're learning a new thing? You guys are in the Jewish education space, and now suddenly you're providing mental health stuff for I don't know how many people. How do you do that? And you're saying you're doing it in a way that the Ministry of Health is trying to learn from you.
Well, the Ministry of Education.
Sorry, Ministry of Education.
Right. So most schools have already some mental health component to it. It's part of the course. And the Ministry of Education, to their credit, will help, especially in the high school, in a standard situation. But this was not a normal situation. So I think my goal was to find people who did understand the mental health world, and to ask them to guide us. So, for example, a member of our board is a very well-known mental health professional, Dr. Tuvia Perry. He, in the initial stages, worked with a team of educators who also have a mental health background to create the various services to make sure that they were mental health services. We've had over 350 students and teachers. Each one of those gets 6 individual sessions. And unlike sometimes what would happen at any HMO, you might have to wait a few months. Those sessions they're able to get it within a few days of the need, sometimes within 24 hours. We created structures where our teachers and our students could have group therapy. We created ways in which we honor the teachers who have given so much of themselves. I think that this is the first war in Israel where there's a Hebrew word for a family that loses a loved one in a terrorist attack or in the war. They're called a mishpacha shkula, or an av shakur, or ima shkula. That word shkula is reserved for a person who's lost a loved one as the hostage, or as in a terrorist act or in the war. For the first time, you have educators that are what I would call mechanchim, educators who are shkulim, who are in that category, because when you've lost 3 or 4 students over a period of 2 weeks, you become bereaved in a very significant way. And then when one of those teachers loses 3, 4, 5, 6, she's in charge of our English department in one of our schools, and then her own son falls, or I think that's the word in Hebrew, shenafal, that fell. I actually think that these young people, when they fall in war, they're actually elevated. I've heard parents say at funerals, my son didn't fall in the war, my son was elevated. And I think that's an accurate portrayal.
Wow, that's a lot to like.
So I did that for myself as much as I did that for anyone else. It's my way of giving. We all have to give in this war. Right. And my way of giving wasn't just to visit my students up north and south. That's a given. Or that wasn't as hard as visiting them in the hospitals, seeing those that had to have lung transplants and others. But I think I did this also for myself, to be perfectly, in some ways it was a selfish agenda. Sometimes being selfish is not a bad thing, but it was a selfish agenda for myself, in order to make sure that I felt that I was doing what I needed to do. And it created a language that allowed all 32 institutions to row together on this issue. Imagine you're an emissary. We have 300 emissaries around the world. Imagine you're an emissary and you get called back and you're serving in the north, and you're living in a tent by Lebanon, and your wife is taking the kids to school and has to clean off the car from all the snow. Who's taking care of that wife in Canada? She doesn't have anyone to speak to. No one there gets what she's going through.
Right.
So I want to make sure that she went to Canada because we sent her there. I want to make sure that she knows that we're here for her.
Right.
It's the long arm of the embrace, which I thought was critically important.
Beautiful. I want to ask you personally, you're a religious leader, you're leading educational institutions. How has your personal faith sustained you through this? How have you thought through that experience?
That's a great question. I think my personal, first of all, I've seen heroes. Heroes in Israel don't need to wear capes. We have a tradition called the Ethics of Our Fathers. It's one of the books of the oral tradition. In Israel, right now, I think there's a new book of the oral tradition being written, The Ethics of Our Children. Our children who've been lost to us in the war have taught us things. So when I have a student, last name is Samu, Yonatan Samu, and in his pants pocket, there was a letter that says that if I fall in the war, I want all my organs to be donated, that can be donated. And both Jews and non-Jews were saved because of that.
Wow.
Well, that comment on a bumper, that person, that's not the ethics of my fathers, that's the ethics of my children. Wow. When I have another student who actually had just finished an art project where he was going through the history of diaspora Jewry, and he designed this beautiful project. Your listeners can Google Eitan Rosenzweig, and they can see his art. This was a 19-year-old. It will take the next 40 years for people to understand the art that this 19-year-old did. There are messages that he is communicating to us. And I could go on for our whole time together and take one story after another. But the point being that we are learning from the heroism. And so for me personally, that has strengthened my belief in God. For me to see that when I would bring various different types of armament to protect someone, the person would say, "Don't give it to me. I'm in a car. Give it to the person who is a commando, who's not in a car." And I said, "You're not in a car. You're in a Jeep. There's no walls. There's no nothing." He says, "No, but at least I'm in a fast-moving vehicle." And I'm looking at myself and saying, if somebody gave me protective gear, would I have the heroism to say, give it to that guy who is a commando and is on foot? I doubt it. I've learned from the goodness of our students, and that has inspired me. The other thing is that, we should ask the question of God, Echa, where are you? How could this have happened? How could have October 7th happened? But then I daven, I pray at a service where John and Rachel Goldberg pray. And this is a Kaddish where they sanctify God's name in memory of their son. And I say to myself, if they can sanctify God's name with everything that they've gone through, what a privilege it is to be able to say Amen to their Kaddish. And then I'm reminded again that the word Echa, how could this have happened? That same word, that Aleph Yud Chaf Hey, Echa, also spells Ayeka, which means the first question that God asks humankind, where are you? Where are we? So when I question God, which I do often, and I don't think there's anything wrong with that, I also have to ask myself, okay, you can question God, but I think you also have to question yourself. What are you doing to make the world better? God gave us free will. Free will has uplifting consequences and challenging consequences. I need to be part of the uplifting consequences. That's the way, at least at this time, I'm dealing with that issue. Where am I in the puzzle? And how do I make this world better and bring God into places that he may not yet be at? Beautiful. That's the way I look at it currently.
Good. So a couple things on that. The first on this image of saying Kaddish, these people who have lost family members, and that example in particular. I'll just share that in the Jewish Way, the seminal work by Rabbi Yitzhak Greenberg, he talks about how unexpected it is that the Kaddish prayer is really about praising God and doesn't say anything about the deceased at all. And the way he phrased it there, if I can do my best to try to paraphrase, is that in this moment of the most pain, where you feel the most distant from God, we have these individuals in the community stand up in front of the community, separate from those who are not saying Kaddish, and they step forward and say, Yehei Shmei Rabbah, like, may Hashem's name be great. And it's almost like a moment to say, like, right when you think I'm going to walk away from the Jewish people or walk away from God because I'm in so much pain, I'm going to stand in front of the whole congregation and I'm going to say out loud, I believe in God, I am on this team, I'm still part of this mission. And I feel you describing that a little bit here, like the inspiration that comes from people who are saying, this is not pushing me away. This is pushing me in a position where I want to step forward and not swear my allegiance, but in some ways swear my allegiance.
His name is Avi Goldberg. He was an emissary with his wife Rachel for us in Memphis. He came back, and he's a rabbi. He served in the IDF, but before he was a rabbi, he was a combat soldier. So he insisted as a rabbi to also go into combat. A few months ago, he fell in battle. He has little kids. He has one little kid who spoke at the funeral about the fact that every single week she or he would put a candy in a bag for his father when he would come back, and he held up the bag of candies, each candy representing a week, and it was 2 full bag. And you see his son standing up and saying Kaddish. What right do I have to walk away from the Jewish experience? This was a man who embraced every Jew with respect. In fact, at his shiva, his wife, who was a holy woman, his wife told members of Knesset, if you want to make a shiva call, you have to come with a member of the opposition. Because if you can't sit at my shiva house with a member of the opposition, better for you not to come.
Wow.
That's the new book. It's not the ethics of our fathers, it's the ethics of our children.
Wow.
That's the book that this generation is writing, and I think we're in good hands.
Right, so speaking of children, you mentioned it earlier before, and I want to ask you again, staying in the personal piece of this, you have a son who's about to join the Army. How are you thinking about that? What's that like for you?
Well, my wife and I talk about this. We're very proud of him. He made Aliyah when he was in 8th grade. How he will serve in the Army, which is not something that I want to talk about on television, but how he will serve in the Army will be his decision. He has a very high profile, so it will be in a pretty serious unit. Are we proud? We're proud, but it's a dialectical experience. Are we also nervous? Mm-hmm. Of course we're nervous. Mm-hmm. We're proud of him. We're proud of the decisions he continues to make for the Jewish people and for himself. Mm-hmm. And we will bless him every single Friday night, whether he's at our Shabbos table or we're holding our hands towards Gaza or toward Lebanon or toward the army base. We will continue to do that. Mm-hmm. And again, to take it out of the personal, we're not the only ones who are blessing our children that way, and we're not the only ones who have children. There's a whole generation of my son's friends that realize that there are larger narratives that they want to be part of. Mm. And it's a privilege to live in a country and a privilege to live in a place where, despite all of the challenges, there is this unbelievable energy. And it's why I think that Israel is rated as one of the happiest countries in the world, despite all the different things that are going on.
Beautiful. So your predecessor, Rabbi Shlomo Riskin, may he live and be well, he led a swelling of Aliyah, of those moving to Israel. And you had this unique experience where you had a very robust, successful career as a Jewish leader and rabbi in America. You took the Boca community, I think, from 60 families to 600 families. You helped get 2 schools off the ground, which are flagship schools now. So you had this opportunity, what it's like to build meaningful, lasting, impactful Jewish community and the next generation of Jews in North America in Boca. And now you've shifted, since 2018 to doing it there. And not only are you doing it on a professional level, but you're doing it in your own home. The average American parent is worried, if I move to Israel, my kid might have to join the army, those kinds of things. What's your reflection on that distinction between being a North American leader and parent to being an Israeli leader and parent? And sub-question, should everyone be making Aliyah, I guess, but I'll let you answer them in your order.
Well, first of all, thank you for your kind words about the profession that my wife and I have chosen, because it's really a joint choosing. My wife has her own profession. She's a pediatric OT, but nothing that we've done it all as a family, so it's really a partnership. Ezer
Kenegdo.
Yes, and Ezer. Yeah. And Ezer more than the Kenegdo, but a helpmate.
Yeah.
But I think you said, impactful, which I think it is, everlasting. Mm-hmm. I think the everlasting Jewish experience, if history has taught us anything, is only in one place in the world, and that is Israel. So I went from being involved with impactful relationships to, I think, impactful relationships that I believe will be everlasting. We're not just building for the next 50 years. We're building for all times. And maybe that's why politics in Israel is so challenging, because we're building for all times.
Because of what's at stake.
Because what's at stake. But the bottom line...
In America, we think a lot is at stake.
Yeah, I mean, America, a lot is at stake.
Tal Becker has a famous quote. He always says, the Israeli-Palestinian peace process will not be solved at a table in Boca Raton.
Right.
You guys can all take a deep breath over there. He uses Boca Raton 100%. As an example. That's on the map.
Yeah,
right, exactly.
Right. So, and Tal's 100% right. Yeah. But the fact that my son, who's going into the army, also speaks Arabic and respects not just his Jewish friends, but respects all people, means that when he's serving in different places, that sensitivity will come to light. Please God, it won't, cause any challenges, but it will definitely affect the way he serves. That's a different. That in America, we build the private space of the Jewish people. It's our community. in America or anywhere in the diaspora, we're not building the public sphere. There isn't a conversation in America of how to run the hospital on Saturday. Does it get run differently? There isn't a conversation about whether chametz, leavened products, can be brought into the hospitals over the Passover period.
Sure.
There isn't those types of conversations, which I think actually are more mundane than the conversations about. I got a phone call from a student. She is in a base very up north, without giving this specific location. It's a small base. There's maybe 10 or 12 people on the base. And all the food that goes into the kitchen is kosher, but because it's such an informal base, everyone, plays around in the kitchen. So let's just say it's not a real kosher kitchen at this point in time. So she keeps her food separate. So she called me and she said that we come together every other week for Sudat, Friday night meal on the base, and the commander wants us to pick a zemer, a song, Friday night song, and we'll sing it all together. And then the commander takes out his guitar on Friday night and will sing and wants to play the song that we want to sing. So that's not permitted in an Orthodox Shabbos observance. She wants to know, on this base up north, can she join that Shabbos meal or not? And I told her she could. I just said that she shouldn't pick one of the songs that the commander should play to. That's not a question you get anywhere else in the world.
Right.
It's just not part of the conversation. Or my son was on a base for Yom Kippur because a whole bunch of soldiers just came out for Gaza, but they had limited time to pray. So he asked me, give me like the top 10 things that you need to do to pray, so that if they only have 3 hours for Yom Kippur experience or 2 hours, what are the top things we got to get through?
Now you're really going to pique people's interest.
Yeah, right.
Everyone wants the copy of the.
By the way, that wasn't so hard because I was asked that question for COVID, right? So basically, it was a cut and paste.
Right.
But those are not questions. I got a question a year or two ago where a group of soldiers, let's just say they were over the border without passports. And they called me and they said, listen, we were supposed to get food delivered. We didn't get food delivered. We have to stay up all night. We have drink. We bought drink, but we don't have any food. And we're in an orange grove and we're going to take some of the oranges. Do we make a blessing on the oranges because it's essentially stolen fruit? Do we make a blessing to God on stolen fruit? Like, there's no response literature for 2,000 years that has that question.
What's the answer?
So the blessing over water, the Talmud says, is a umbrella blessing, shakol niya bivaro. So I told them that when they drink the water, they should have in mind the oranges, so they don't have to. But the answer is nowhere near as important as the question. And so that's an everlasting experience. It's an everlasting experience when you get questions like that.
Right. And they are trying, both in fighting and in making their way through the war, to keep that mindset. And I just want to be sensitive to time. I want to ask you, if we have time, 2 last things. One is, say a little bit. I know Ohr Torah Stone has been invaluable in thinking about the role of women in the Jewish people in general. My wife is an alum of one of your yeshivas. Say just a couple sentences about what's happening with women since October 7th in the Army from where you're sitting.
Well, first of all, we're so happy that your wife is one of our alumni. It's great, and we have thousands of them, but we're very excited when we hear that. So sure. I hope she grew from the experience. I'm sure she did.
For sure.
Secondly, what's happened since October 7th is, out of the 8,000 women who graduated from high schools last year, Orthodox women that graduated from Orthodox high schools last year, 3,500 decided that they were going to serve in the IDF. So the Midrash at Lindenbaum's was probably when your wife was there was only one. Now we have 4 branches all over Israel. We're training women to have a spiritual anchors before they serve in the Army, and then we visit them every other week to make sure they're doing okay, both physically, so the food that we bring and the snacks we bring, and the Torah that comes along with the snacks. But what's happening is that out of the 3,500, 350 decided they wanted to do combat. So the Army came to us and said, we'd like you to incubate a program with us. And so we incubated 2 programs, 2 combat units, which are in country. One is called Isuf Kravi, Field Intelligence, and one is the Protective Dome, and Iron Dome, and facilitating that. So those are combat units, but they're in-country combat units. So these just started. There are female officers, and for our perspective, we help create the protocols, but we also now just placed 2 women for the first time in the history of the State of Israel who are serving as the clergy, answering the halachic questions of these women. And it's only been 6 months, but from what I hear from my colleagues who are serving as rabbis in the Army, the women aren't the only ones coming to them, but the men are coming to them. They're very skilled. They took the same test that any man would take in order to become a rabbi. They're spiritual leaders. And as of Friday, another woman who fits this same profile is now serving in the IDF in a position that I've been asked not to articulate, even though it's not, I wouldn't call it a position that is from an intelligence perspective, but the Army, wants certain positions not to be articulated in the public space. So six months ago, there were no women serving in these roles, and now there are women serving in these roles. Wow. And more Orthodox women are serving in the IDF because they believe, as the Talmud tells us, that in cases of this nature, we have the responsibility to serve. That's one perspective. The second is, we've been dealing with the chief rabbis and the rabbis in the Army itself. We've been dealing with the chief rabbis and the rabbinic leaders of the Army, making sure what happens if, God forbid, there is a woman whose husband went out to war and he can't be found. We don't want that woman to remain what's called an aguna, a woman who is still chained to a man that can't be found. So just like David, the king, had a certain protocol and a certain document that the soldiers were able to fill out, we have resurrected that document in this war.
Wow. Last question. This is coming a totally different direction, and I'll keep you on your toes here. I heard through my sources that you are someone passionate about archaeology, and I just wanted to ask you, there's a whole universe of archaeology and amazing things, take your time, that are discovered in Israel. Just share with me one moment of archaeological discovery that really has stuck with you and really impacted you spiritually or intellectually, whatever it is. Give me something.
Well, first of all around the temple, there are archaeological, all around the Western Wall, there are remnants from the temple. That in itself tells the story that Jewish people have been there for thousands of years. Wow. I think that there are 2 pieces of archaeology that really speak, there are many pieces of archaeology that really speak to me. But I'll just pick 2 from around that area. Number one is, Josephus speaks about in the sewer systems of Israel, they would hide, and the Romans and the special legion that was attached to Jerusalem would take their swords and they would destroy the stones and put holes in there and kill the Jews, murder the Jews by dropping their swords. So if you actually follow the area around the southern wall, the western southern wall, you will actually see these sewers, and you will see, as Josephus explains, you will see these places where the swords, the slits that the swords were made.
Wow.
And it just reminds me that happened when the Romans destroyed the temple, but we're blessed to have an IDF, and October 7th, the Roman destruction, this time we don't have to, we're not hiding in sewers anymore.
Sure.
That to me is a powerful statement. There's also a very large pillar that's now found in multiple shattered pieces of praising Titus and Vespasian for destroying the temple. And as I said, that pillar is in multiple shards, although pulled together when you walk into the southern wall area. But the Jewish people are not are not shattered. With all our challenges, we're whole, and it's just a reminder of the gift of what it is, both religiously, spiritually, physically, of having a modern state of Israel. So just to give you
amazing.
Two examples.
A conversation
so
for
many.
next time. Rabbi Dr. Kenneth Brander, thank you so much. Really a zechut, a merit to sit with you and to learn from you. For those who want to learn more, go to ots.org.il to learn more about Ohr Torah Stone and the amazing work they're doing. And thank you so much.
Thank you for the opportunity. I really enjoyed myself.